Hello and welcome to the final episode of my mini-series on one of the greatest engineers in history, Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Having listened to the other episodes, you may be under the impression that he must have been single, because how on earth could he have run all of these projects, created so many things, and had a family life? Indeed, he kept a diary, and in one entry expressed his own doubts about his suitability as a husband and father. Once he had become established and had a successful business, he did indeed marry. This marriage was actually delayed because of his appointment as the chief engineer of the Great Western Railway. And if you remember the episode on the Great Western Railway, you will understand that he was travelling across the country on horse and by coach and working up to 20 hours a day. But he did marry. His wife was Elizabeth Mary Horsley. They were married on the 5th of April 1836. Mary Elizabeth Horsley was the daughter of Charles Horsley, a musician and composer. This was a family that was very well connected with the musical world and had many famous composers who visited the family home. Together, they had 3 children. Far from being only a driven engineer, an inventor and businessman, he was also a caring father. In the book Brunel, The Man Who Built the World by Steve Brindle, many of Brunel's diary entries are quoted, as well as letters to his children. This gives an insight into the other side of this amazing, complex man. I strongly recommend reading this book if you want to know more about Brunel, the man, and his achievements. Very little of Brunel's work was done on behalf of the government. This was not really surprising. In the middle of the 19th century, almost all infrastructure projects were privately financed, and in fact, the ideas of private individuals or companies. Given the present fiasco of the HS2 railway in the UK, compared to Brunel's magnificent railways, especially the Devon and Cornwall, built more than 175 years ago, maybe they were right. One notable exception to this being the Caledonian Canal in Scotland, which was a government-inspired and funded project to reduce unemployment in the Scottish Highlands. By the way, it didn't work. However, quite surprisingly, Brunel did carry out a government project during the Crimean War. The Crimean War, which lasted from 1853 until 1856, was a war in which Britain, France, the Ottoman Empire and Piedmont were fighting the Russian Empire. This was the first major war which was covered by newspaper correspondents, most famously William Howard Russell of the Times newspaper, and it was also the first major war in which photography was extensively used. It was no longer feasible for military leaders to hide their blunders, and blunders there were. The war exposed scandalous incompetence in the British military command. This came as a shock to the public, because most people lived under the illusion that the British Army was still the same army that had won so many victories against the Napoleonic forces decades before. Nothing could have been further from the truth. Apart from the strategic and logistical chaos, the provision of healthcare for soldiers went way beyond chaos or incompetence. A new word needs to be invented. In the course of the 6 months between 1854 and 1855, the medical arrangements for the sick and wounded soldiers were almost non-existent. It is believed that 34,000 soldiers out of 56,000 who were either ill or wounded in the Crimea at that time died of disease, over 40%. Florence Nightingale campaigned extensively to expose the scandal and do something about it. She regarded Benjamin Hawes, who was the permanent Undersecretary at the War Office, as the biggest obstacle to reform. In reality, Hawes was not as deaf to her complaints as she thought. Apart from being more sympathetic to her message than most people imagined, he was also Brunel's brother-in-law. On February the 16th, 1855, Hawes contacted Brunel and asked him if he could help by designing some sort of temporary hospital accommodation that could be shipped to the Crimea. He took some time off from the construction of the Great Eastern, the world's biggest ship by far, and by March the 5th, he was ready to present his plans to the War Office. He had conceived the design for prefabricated timber buildings. Each element of these buildings was light enough to be carried by 2 men, and when assembled, these buildings would have long walls and would be well drained and ventilated. The whole layout could be extended as necessary with additional buildings, and the whole thing could be assembled by unskilled workers. Hawes and the Minister of War agreed to the plan, and the manufacture of the components started. We think that flat-pack furniture and flat-pack constructions of any type are something new. Brunel invented all of this in little more than a weekend. By the end of April, Brunton, who was one of Brunel's senior assistants, was given the temporary rank of Major in the British Army, and with 30 men from the Army Works Corps, set off with the first components for hospital at Lencoy on the Dardanelles. It is a tribute to Brunel's inventiveness and organisation ability that this could be done so quickly. The first consignment arrived in May with instructions for assembly that were absolutely clear. 2 months later, 300 beds were already occupied, and by Christmas of 1855 the whole hospital was built with all 1,000 beds occupied. In that period, the hospital on average had all these 1,000 beds occupied, and the fatality rate was only about 4%, compared to the fatality rate previously, which had been at 42% in the Barrack Hospital at Scutari. As you can see, apart from building revolutionary ships, railways, bridges, ports, and a host of other things, he was also a pioneer of the flat-pack kit, as have been companies like MFI and IKEA, and many others in more recent years. Although this was a government finance project, Brunel ran it from start to finish without meddling bureaucrats. This is probably why it was so successful. I hope you've enjoyed this mini-series, and I hope this will stimulate you to find out more about Isambard. Apart from reading the books, which I've included in the description, if you are a UK resident or if you're visiting the UK, take a train from Paddington to Penzance to understand how a real railway should be built. Also, visit Bristol. Anyone who knows me might be surprised by this, because I'm quite critical of the city. As far as I'm concerned, it is an unlovely and unloved city, especially by those who govern it. However, it contains the SS Great Britain, Temple Meads railway station, and the Clifton Suspension Bridge, 3 of Brunel's masterpieces, and well worth visiting. Next time, we're moving to a different century and a very, very different topic. Please click like and subscribe, and the notifications bell if you haven't done so already. Have a good week. See you next time. Bye for now.